type of audience we have. So if you could take a few minutes and just fill in that poll, we appreciate it. I ask that all participants stay mute during this conversation, and any questions or suggestions or comments that you would like to make, please put them in the chat room. In the last 10 to 15 minutes of our discussion, the last 10 to 15 minutes of our discussion, we will address any questions you may have. All right, let's go ahead and begin talking about, giving a quick synopsis about our panelists. We've also sent you a PowerPoint presentation that you can find out a little bit more detail about each of our panelists. I'm going to do a very short summary of each. We have Ryan Dill. Ryan Dill serves as the City of Greensboro's first Chief Creative Economy Officer. He is leading Creative Greensboro, the city's Office for Arts and Culture. Founded in 2019, the office is guided by the goals and strategies articulated in the Creative Greensboro Cultural Plan and provides support for, ensures access to, and drives awareness of Greensboro's creative community. We also have Maria Gonzalez, who is a native of Colombia and moved to the United States in 1988. She arrived to this country speaking no English, but it was never an obstacle to building a successful career. Her lifelong passion has always been in fitness and helping others. In 2019, she was promoted to Club Fitness Greensboro CEO. Maria has exemplified hard work, dedication, and a commitment to education and personal growth. Her leadership and positive encouragement are an inspiration to Club Fitness members, staff, and the community. She is a former board chair of Faith Action International and former board chair of the Weaver Foundation. She is currently a board member of NCCJ and the board chair of Casa Azul. Maria has been one of the organizers of the Greensboro National International Dance Day at LeBauer Park and led Faces of Diversity Greensboro Project. These events have brought hundreds of people together to dance, laugh, make new friends while embracing and celebrating the diversity of our community. We also have Princess Johnson, an international dancer, choreographer, entrepreneur, and motivator. She has choreographed dances since she was 8 years old. Princess continued to pursue her passion and developed her dance technique training by completing a dance degree at UNC Greensboro, along with her business degree. She also interned at Richmond Ballet in Richmond, Virginia as a dance management intern, where she worked alongside the business manager and development director to learn about nonprofit dance company management. Upon returning to North Carolina, Princess taught classes at Triple Threat Dance Center in Winston-Salem and High Point, and went on to establish Royal Expressions Contemporary Ballet in 2009. Princess has created 6 original dance productions, has taught hundreds of students, and even led a team to bring world-renowned ballerina Misty Copeland to Greensboro, North Carolina in 2014, as well as Alicia Groff-Mack of Alvin Ailey in 2015. Our next panelist is Darlene J Mcclinton, who is the CEO and one of my personal close friends of the Artist Lot LLC arts venue where creative minds meet. She's an adjunct professor at North Carolina A&T State University, lead arts integration, facilitator for Guilford County Schools, and a professional artist. Through public art, she develops collaborations and community engagement that foster research and strategic partnerships between communities and students. Darlene is an accomplished visual artist, art-educated scholar, and a rising star in the Greensboro area. She received her undergraduate degree in art from NC State University and her master's of fine arts from Howard University in Washington, D.C. Darlene has 4 historical murals in North Carolina and exhibits her work in galleries and museums nationally. We also have Brian Turman. a self-avowed hip-hop head, father, and educator who is dedicated and determined to ensure that African-American trials and tribulations, productivity, and creativity are included within the ivory towers of academia. He is a double alumnus of NC with his BA in English and an MA in English and African-American literature. Brian is a career educator with over 24 years of teaching experience. In 2002, he joined the faculty of the Department of English at NC as a full-time lecturer of humanities, African-American literature, and composition. In August of 2006, he designed and is currently teaching 2 hip-hop related courses in the Department of English, the history, literacy, connections, and social relevance of hip-hop. And then our last but final panelist, Arts Greensboro's Laura Way. Arts Greensboro is led by Laura Way as its president and CEO with over 20 years of nonprofit management experience and a finely tuned set of skills and expertise in relationship building, accounting, art management, brand management, budgeting, directing, event management, financial management, fundraising, grant writing, human resources, leadership, community and marketing, materials management, personnel management, policy analysis, board development, and strategic planning. Whew, that was a mouthful, but it's true. I know this for a fact, Laura Way. Laura has a hands-on approach to management. While always strategic, she expects and welcomes to be held accountable for all aspects of Arts Greensboro's operations and public interface. All right, these are our distinguished panelists. As I've said before, we've sent you your own PowerPoint presentation so you can learn more about our panelists, but we're going to go ahead and start our evening. We'll probably end at exactly 7 o'clock. So we will start our questions now. All right. The first question, do you believe systematic racism exists within the arts? And if so, will you name one example? I'll start this conversation off with Laura of Arts Greensboro.
I do believe there is systemic racism within the arts, and you don't have to go far or look at any research. It'll tell you the story of systemic racism. Recently, Arts Greensboro was led a task force looking at our funding in the arts, and a lot of things came to light, but part of that was that there's inequity in our funding model. So I believe that is rooted at its core in systemic racism. And then recently, I personally realized something, Darlene knows this, I told this story this morning, about me personally engaging. What I realized now was, I think it was racist, and it was unintentional, but it was a group of arts leaders in Greensboro, all white, sitting around a table around a major grant project. And what would we do if asked to, invited to apply? It was a significant grant, over $500,000. And my idea was to work in East Greensboro along the tornado zone to talk about the impact of the tornado, the history of the neighborhood, how it was impacted, and then the social, cultural, and economic outcomes from the tornado pre-tornado. What I realized afterwards was there were no Black faces sitting around that table. There was no one from East Greensboro sitting around that table. No one with personal experience in that neighborhood, in that community around that table. And while I patted myself on the back thinking this is really a great idea, there needed to be other voices at that table, and it just never entered the mind of the group at the time to take a seat, sit back and say, who is not at this table?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you sharing your experience. Maria Gonzalez of Casa Azul, would you mind answering the question?
Sure. I think I have to echo some of what Laura just said. There is an exclusion. You know, there's many organizations that they are not invited to the conversation. They're not invited to the table. So you can call that systematic racism. You can call it systematic exclusion. The size of the organizations matter too, what connections they have, regardless, you know, like what race you're from, right? So roots, you know, organizations that are grassroots sometimes don't even get a chance. You know, like we're not going out, we're not reaching at communities. We have a pretty diverse community. We have over 140 countries represented in 295 plus K that is in Greensboro. And, you know, when we think about arts, you know, like how many races do we really see around our city? You know, we're pretty rich in culture, but we're lacking to represent this community. So like I said, I don't want to call it, you know, racism or exclusion, but it is there. And we have to be intentional. And I appreciate what you're doing, Sunny, because these conversations have to happen and have to happen more. I appreciate what Laura is doing because she is reaching out and she is bringing some of us to the table to have these conversations. It may not be easy conversations that we have to have, but there is a lot more representation that has to happen.
Thank you, Maria. You said that very eloquently. Ryan, do you believe systematic racism exists within the arts? And if so, do you have an experience that you'd like to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe it exists without question. And I would, I think that my colleagues who spoke before me have identified what is the most explicit form of systematic exclusion and racism that I see in the sector. But, you know, it's an interesting anecdote or data point maybe, but if we look across this country at the number of organizations that have a primary focus of serving and engaging communities of color that have reached a budget size, stay with me for just a second on this, I know it's a big number, but that have reached a budget size of $5 million a year. There are 50 of those organizations across this country that have a primary focus on engaging communities of color. Now, how many arts and culture nonprofits that focus on white, Eurocentric fine art forms of that budget size exist? The number is 925. So that is sick, and that does not happen by accident. It does not happen by mistake. It does not happen overnight. It has happened by decades upon decades of funding systems and structures all across this country at every level, public, private, individuals, etc., privileging the opportunity of those who have being afforded the opportunity to maintain and preventing the opportunity for building infrastructure of the next generation of arts and culture organizations that reflect the next, not even the next, today's generation of arts and culture organizations that are reflective of the creative aspirations of the people who live in our communities now. So yes, without question, I had I've only been in my role with the city for 9 months, and the past 6 of them have been interesting to say the least. But in my prior role, in one of my prior roles at the Arts Council of Charlotte, you know, we had a similar reckoning moment that Laura, I think, is explaining from Arts Greensboro, when we realized that 85% of the funding of our organization was going to 20 organizations, only one of which had any sort of focus on communities of color. And again, we had this structure where you had to have a budget of at least $300,000 to even be eligible to apply for a grant. And what that means is none of the organizations that are truly doing the work already today at the community level were even eligible to approach us for funding. And so that had to be obliterated. So yes, Sunny, I appreciate the invitation to be here. It's good to see some familiar faces, but also some new folks, and I'm glad to be with you all. But yes, systemic racism is alive and well, unfortunately, in our creative community. But the last thing I'd say is where systemic racism does not exist is in the awarding of creative intellect to our people, right? Like, we are all creative people and creative beings. And so what we as feeble humans have to do is get out of the way of deciding that we're somehow have the authority to sanction which is better and which is not, and provide pathways for opportunity and access so that we can realize our full creative potential. Thanks.
Very well said, Ryan. Thank you for the research and just kind of giving us a larger perspective about this. Princess of Royal Expressions, can you answer this question? Do you believe systematic racism exists within the arts?
Absolutely. For me, it's just the absence of Black arts nonprofits thriving in our community, Hispanic, Asian. When you think of a thriving arts organization in Greensboro, you see white-led organizations. And Greensboro is over 200 years old, yet we don't have representation from an arts organization that has been supported for decades upon decades. But we can see that when it comes to white-led organizations. So for me, it was just looking at the fact that our organization is 11 years old and we're considered a Black leader in our city, and that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be one of the top Black arts organizations considering our size and structure. And I also think there's something to be said about the Cultural Arts Center and the ability to be able to run an organization without having to worry about rent or utilities, while organizations that are outside of that building do. And most organizations that run inside of the Cultural Arts Center are white-led. So then that causes a systemic problem in and of itself as well.
Thank you, Princess. And Brian, you'll be the last person for this question, and then we'll move on to the next.
Well, yeah, I think the short answer is yes, and I absolutely concur with what the other panelists have said. It's not only, I think, on the funding side, because patronage in and of itself is an elitist thing. It kind of always has been. And so you tend to give money to people who look like you, particularly when people who don't look like you don't have access to the room. And I think that's what Maria was talking about. You have to have access. And it all comes down to representation. I think the things that we've done in terms of the last 5 or 6 months here in Greensboro with some very public representations of communities of color vis-a-vis the arts is doing something to help that. I also think that oftentimes it comes from just how the art from people of color is initially critiqued, in that it's normally initially seen as less than. And if you look at something that's less than, so it's always called Black art or brown art. And if you put those kind of women's art or LGBTQIA art, and once you put those titles in front of it to a dominant society who sees in and of itself primarily white male, that it diminishes your understanding of said art. And if you don't have a proper understanding of the art or the artists themselves, then I don't think there's much of a chance of you representing it well, funding it well, allowing them access to those spaces where art is conducted and seen and viewed. And then certainly the city and the state and other federal organizations aren't going to support it much at all. So I think it's a big cornucopia of things that are problematic when it comes to Black and brown art being accepted and then patronized in a capitalist society.
Great perspective. Thank you, Brian. All right, our next question is, have you or your organization faced challenges for gaining funding and exposure for your craft? We'll start this one out with Darlene McClinton of the Artist Block.
Hey, everybody. I would say not necessarily funding, but I would use the word support. When we first opened up the Artist Block in 2014, we were primarily an art supply store. We're basically on UNCG's campus, and it was very challenging to get white people to come in to patronize the business. I really had to jump through a lot of hoops and leaps and bounds to make them feel safe when they came to the place. They walked in, seen Black people working there. They would just turn around and walk out. I had to build relationships with the professors just to let them know. So I would say that with us being near UNCG right there where they literally could walk around the corner, the fact that they would drive to Michael's or drive to Hobby Lobby and pass us just to get art supplies, I saw that was, it was a challenge for us. We were able to overcome it, but it was a challenge.
Thank you. That same question for Princess. Have you or your organization faced challenges for gaining funding and exposure for your craft?
Yes, absolutely. I've gotten to a point where applying for grants, I have to be extra strategic about it, because I honestly have learned that as a person and an organization of color, when you're applying for a grant, you're probably wasting your time, because very little grant funding dollars in the arts community goes to arts organizations of color. One of the things that I struggle with is getting funding on a local level so that we are appealing on a state and national level. We have the largest grant we've ever received from Arts Greensboro is $3,000, and we're 11 years old, which in our 11-year span, the most we've ever, the total accumulative that we've ever received is $8,000, whereas a white organization in our city can get that within one round. So if we can't show support on a local level, then trying to ask for support on any other levels, it just pigeonholes us, and we're just like tires running in the mud. So it is very frustrating, and I go back and I talk and I ask, how can we improve our application? We make those improvements, we still don't see an improvement. So it's been super challenging. The way that we've overcome even getting through this is not relying on grant funding, relying on ticket sales and individual funders and crowdsourcing. That's where we're able to really get what we need to be able to pull off our projects. But in the end, for us to be able to operate at our fullest capacity, we have to get more larger grant funding dollars so that we can pay our dancers and have an ongoing season. We would love to have a season of shows like our cohorts do, but we're just not, we haven't been supportive enough to do that.
Thank you, Princess. That's a fantastic perspective. And I'll also ask Maria this question in terms of Casa Azul and your knowledge of this. How do you think Casa Azul has faced these challenges of funding?
So one of the limitations that Casa Azul has is that we don't have funding for operating expenses. So as of right now, we all operate as a volunteer basis. So all our board are hands-on doing everything on top of our full-time jobs and our families. So it is very limited what we can do, but the need is there. Like, our artist needs us. And not just that, I would say that we get the exposure, we get the support to promote our events that we do, and then we get lots of people that come and participate. But then the way for us to do it is, we're gonna need to have, like funding to be able to grow. We have the potential, but we're not gonna get funding if we don't have the size. So there is all these work through that we have to find ways that, we will not be able to apply for grants if we don't have someone working. And, you know, as Princess said, like, you know, like, what do you pick to write a grant for? You know, there's like lots of time that is involved. And when you have people just volunteering their time, it's almost impossible to like reach some of those funding monies.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question. What is your organization's demographic and what do you believe is needed in our organization, in our community? I apologize. Maria, do you mind speaking about that again? What do you think is
So
needed?
we're a Latinx organization, you know, and we aim to promote the Latino culture, you know, into our communities. So with that said, all the events that we have offered to the community have been pretty well attended, not only by the Latin community, but also everybody, you know, like people come and I have to say, when we do our events, you can tell the hunger that is out there for people to be exposed to other things, to our music, to our culture, to the love, to the passion that, you know, represent the Latinx community. So we hope to have a lot more opportunities to be able to share with our community what we have.
Excellent. I'm going to ask Princess that same question. What is your organization's demographic and what do you believe is needed in our community?
Right. So currently our staff and board are 100% African American. We serve about 95% African American students through our school, and we have some Hispanic and Asian represented, and a few white people. Typically, we're contacted by African American people because on our marketing materials, you're gonna see Black children dancing. And typically we don't hear from other cultures because people can see and look and decide if they're gonna give us a call. So I don't know how you break a barrier like that, but that's what we attract because that's what people see. Although we're very open to anyone learning to dance from us. As far as our audience, it's actually about 50-50 Black and white and other cultures. So what we need is, I guess, more exposure in the community, more visibility, and again, just figuring out how to help people understand that a Black dance teacher is just as capable to teach you as a white dance teacher. Black dancers have just as much skill as a white dancer, and just helping the community understand that, and also to have an open mind and heart to what it is that we are sharing with our community, and to see things from a different perspective.
Thank you, Princess. Darlene, I asked you that same question.
Yes, our demographic is 90% of educated people of color. We try to work with all cultures. It really doesn't really matter what your background is. But I would say that one of the things that the Artist Block has done for the community is kind of level the playing field out. We've created access to artists to be able to express themselves, create platforms to be able to make money. Even with me being at Arts Greensboro and doing the virtual workshop, that was access to a lot of Black artists that had no idea about Arts Greensboro, how to apply for funding to launch a project. So I just think that the Artist Block is helping with identity. Being able to see 3 brown women run a successful business in Greensboro for 6 years is just a testament to let them know that they can do it, it can be done. It takes dedication and hard work, but us brown people staying in business is something that the community needs to see as well.
Thank you, Darlene. And Brian, Can you answer that? I know Brian also does some things with the entertainment field. Could you also answer that question, please?
Yes, I think on my end, obviously somebody that works at the state university, funding for arts, particularly over the last probably 7 or 8 years, has gotten really interesting. I'm facing some of the same problems that I hear some of the panelists talking about. Cuts to the NEA, cuts to the NEH, grant and funding opportunities are diminishing as we speak, or there's just so much competition for the few pennies that are available. Makes it kind of difficult. I've seen just over the last 15 years that I've been at the university, how difficult it is for us to get speakers. We used to have a time where we had speakers, artists of all ilks come through the university almost on a every other week basis. Now that's watered down to these really big performances where generally we'll have once or twice a year, some really big national person will come through and we'll have a panel or some discussion of the arts, and then departments will be up to their own means to find fill-ins, local and folk who quite frankly don't cost a lot of money. So I think that level of funding has been challenging for all of us. I think the current political climate, particularly as somebody, once again, who works at a state university, the current political climate is adverse to the arts, to say the least. So I think we're finding fewer and fewer opportunities in that way. And on the business entrepreneurial side, these last 6 months with the pandemic particularly have absolutely destroyed most of our ability to bring in big name artists or the like, or even to book venues that'll hold, a considerable amount of people. So I think that the arts have always been underfunded, let's be clear. I don't think we've ever, fortunately, had a time in our society where arts were properly funded. So I think you throw in, the recession over the last, 15 years, a current political climate, and then people's oftentimes inability to recognize how important the arts are as a humanist and somebody who looks at hip hop artistically. I oftentimes find myself faced with this same conversation. How can you call something like WAP art? And I think, once again, it's perspective. Black and brown art is oftentimes not seen as important as other forms of art until it makes money. But then that money doesn't travel back the other way when we're talking about developing young artists and having the kind of grassroots organizations and opportunities, as Maria was speaking of earlier. So I think, funding is going to be a problem with arts. And I think that's kind of what makes all of us humanists. We've chosen to fight the good fight.
Thank you, Brian. Another great perspective. I'm going to move on to the next question. Have you noticed any changes since the death of George Floyd and the protests and the most recent calls for justice? I'll start this particular question off with Laura of Arts Greensboro.
Well, initially, all the artists who leaned in and created murals downtown was remarkable and life-affirming. How many of those artists were artists of color initially I'm not really sure of, but I do know that artists of color did lean in and created some incredible murals, Darlene among them. I think that was an immediate reaction to George Floyd. And now we're hearing a lot of organizations, mine included, that we need to do the hard work around talking about race, racism, inequity at our board level or at our staff level, and Arts Greensboro is willing to do the work. But now I'm beginning, and arts funding as well, the North Carolina Arts Council is leaning into creating opportunities that are intended to create more opportunity and equity. But now I'm getting I hear pushback, sort of the beginning of grumbling around the protest and the little bit of, well, don't all lives matter? Why is it Black Lives Matter? And learning how to address those statements in a very direct and clear way that offers the opportunity to open the discussion versus slamming a door is a skill set that I am still working on. But it's disconcerting when I hear those statements from people I didn't necessarily expect to hear those statements around. So I worry that as a community, I do think we want to move forward, but I think there is that little bit of backlash happening that is about power and the power dynamics, and not wanting to change the current hierarchy of our systems. And we need to be cognizant of it and aware and ready to address those concerns as they're raised.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to say that I do think that it's very important that when you are a person of power and you are white or Caucasian, that those conversations are had with each other, because that's when people really listen, because you look like them and they may not understand why you don't see it the same way they do. Like, come on, we're empowered. Is that what you really want? But I think that in reality, we do have to understand that through more inclusion, it's better for everyone. It allows everyone to be successful. And so it doesn't really take away from anybody. It just adds different perspectives to the table. And so it's just better for the whole city. But thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I will ask Ryan the same thing. Have you noticed any changes since the death of George Floyd and the most recent call for justice?
So I think that, yes, but it feels like maybe that, I mean, this is clearly a movement that has been in existence for, I mean, literally decades, but that has been, I think, gaining momentum and traction over the past, 4 to 6 years. And I think that what has happened over the past 6 months is, I'll just speak personally for a second here, but, being in quarantine and at home with yourself and maybe with a significant other or a loved one or your dogs, your kitties or whatever, but we've all had a little bit more time to spend some time in quiet reflection about who we are and who we're not and what we're okay with and what we're not and how we're going to leverage ourselves to create something different moving forward. And so I think that we've seen a response to the tragic killing of George Floyd in a way that we may not have if we were just so busily moving about on the hamster wheel our lives as we're used to doing. And so I think that that may be a big part of it, perhaps. But there's also this coalition of the willing that is growing, that is very exciting. I mean, it's conversations like this, Sunny, and courageous community leaders who say, we're going to get together in a circle. And even though it may be uncomfortable and we may not all have the perfect answers or the exact right thing to say, we're going to talk about it. And I think that I see that there's more and more people, especially leaders, who are willing to invest in those conversations, which is important. We moved quickly as we could, I think probably pretty quickly for the city with the street mural initiative in the weeks following the killing of George Floyd. And as flawed as that initiative was in some ways, it was, I think, still an important thing for the city to get involved in. And, Laura mentioned about the calls and sort of the sidebar conversations and grumblings. We won't even get into some of the stuff that, I found on the other side of the phone when I picked it up to answer the calls that came in over, that month of time. But what I would say is all it took me was hanging out with Sunny and Shala and Darlene on the street doing the work to know without question 100% that we were where we needed to be, doing what we needed to do. And so I just say that spaces like these are so important to keep the momentum going. Allowing a space for us to think together and talk together and, yes, challenge each other, but also support each other, I think is so important to sustain the momentum. So thanks.
Said, Ryan. Thank you. I love that. Brian, and thank you for your honesty. Thank you. Brian, I asked you that same question. Have you noticed any changes since the death of George Floyd and our most recent call for justice?
Well, yeah, I echo exactly what Ryan said in terms of, I think, as Beanie Siegel said, pressure bust pipes. So this is a decades-long buildup, I think, of pressure. And I think, we often forget in this moment that the George Floyd murder occurred right on the heels of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. So even in this year, there was a steady buildup of just, for lack of a better terms, I can't take it anymore. And I think that, once again, for all it's maligned to be, hip hop has been one of those art forms that has consistently spoken this truth, this unfortunate truth that we live in an American society that is, unfortunately, oftentimes based on inequity. And I think that, when Melly Mel in '82 said, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge, I'm trying not to lose my head," he was talking about in the same society that NWA 7 years ago when they said F the police, and then even YG last year or 2 years ago with the F Donald Trump, and now there's a guy named Conway the Machine that has a record called Frontlines, which is about being out during a protest in this moment here, and hers, HER's I Can't Breathe. I mean, so I think that artists have, when given the opportunity, particularly within hip hop and Black music, Black music has been that voice of our culture, of our pain and frustration and joy and triumph and lack of agency and everything else. And so I think that in this moment, it doesn't surprise me that hip hop artists, as are artists of other ilks, are reacting to this moment using what they know best, and that is their artistic ability. Russell Simmons once said that hip hop artists are poets and they hold a mirror up to society, and oftentimes society just doesn't like what it sees in the mirror. And I think that's one of the things that artists have been doing very well, if it's dancers or visual artists or poets or singers or MCs, that they've consistently held this mirror up to society. And oftentimes we don't like what it sees. And I think that the young people nowadays are just smashing that mirror and demanding a much better image of who we are. And I think our art is an absolute reflection of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. We're going to move on to our next question. One of the things about these panel conversations is that we definitely want to get the conversation going and to talk about difficult things so that we can learn from each other and we can come up with solutions so that we can actually create action and strategic plans to change things. Having said that, what can our community do to be more inclusive of all people and ethnic groups, specifically in the art community? And again, I'll start this off with Laura Way of Arts Greensboro.
Well, I think we could start at the organizational level, and with executives and boards need to look around the table, who is sitting in the offices, who is their staff, who are their volunteers, who are their board members, who are their funders, who are their patrons, and do an assessment. Is it diverse? Are they reaching new people? Are they inviting people in to participate? But more importantly, I think arts organizations and the community in general need to meet people where they're at more effectively. They need to go out and experience some art form that they have not participated in before. They need to meet new artists. They need to buy that album or that CD or that iTunes drop and experience a new music. Everyone needs to put in the time and the work, self-reflection. Am I as inclusive as I can be? Do I know people outside of my circle? Is my organization as inclusive as it can be? Do we invite and encourage people in? And do we go out and welcome and encourage people to get to know us better where they're at? And then, am I breaking my own boundaries around what I think is a particular art form or discipline that appeals to me? Is it just because I'm unfamiliar or uncomfortable with it? Go ahead and sit with discomfort, learn something new every single day, be a part of it. And I think that if everyone did that work, I think we would move our community forward as a more inclusive, arts-friendly, equitable community.
Thank you, Laura. And I really appreciate what you said. I think that, and I think about this often, if only we could have a friend of a different nationality, where we can really, really see that these stereotypes that we've been fed for so long are built on things that just aren't true. They're built on lies. But it's only through experiencing other cultures and people and not being afraid to do that, not being afraid to walk into an area that people may not look like you. Because believe it or not, a lot of us African Americans that live in North Carolina, we go to a lot of places that nobody looks like us, and we still patronize it. We still, you know, have to kind of feel comfortable in that environment. So I think it's really important that, as you said, we kind of push past that uncomfortable zone, our comfort zone, and get to know other people and other cultures. Thank you for that. I asked Ryan the same question. What can our art community do to be more inclusive of all people and ethnic groups?
Well, I think we all agreed unanimously at the beginning of the call that this is a systematic issue, right? That racism and exclusion in our arts community is systematic. And so I think that the solution has to also be systematic in its approach. It's going to require a sustained commitment to the solution. I've heard Maria and Princess in particular speak eloquently tonight about their own challenges and acknowledging that yes, space is part of it, but it's also staff to be able to activate and do things in the space. And so there certainly is funding solutions, there's space solutions, there's infrastructure building solutions. Our current reality, as I may have said in sort of my opening question, but our current reality didn't happen overnight. It did happen quickly, but it didn't happen overnight. And it happened because a variety of infrastructure building entities, be it private foundations, local, federal, state government agencies, decided to invest in the creation of the arts ecosystems that we have in cities all across our country. And so it's going to take that level of a commitment on a variety of levels to create a new class. And it's not in lieu of, it's in addition to. There is value to the work that is being done by white-led Eurocentric organizations. So it's not I hope that it's not an either or. It's a balancing, it's a rebalancing and an acknowledgement of just how robust the investments are going to have to be to create equity, fairness, justice. This is about jobs. It's about economic development. I think I saw somebody post that in the chat box, like the arts mean business. People spend money when they participate in the arts. Anyway, I'm probably going off on a soapbox at this point, but the morsel is we need a systematic approach. We need collaborative approaches where we can agree and align on, I sit in a particular place in my role within the city. that's unlike where anyone else sits, but I don't sit where Laura does. Laura and I don't sit where the Community Foundation does. I mean, and I'm just pulling names out at this point, but we need a collaborative set of solutions, I believe.
Yes, thank you. And I agree with that. And being inclusive of other races never takes away from white people and what they've done, and appreciating their talents and skills is just making room for other people. So I think that I agree with what you were saying with the fairness, and I do understand sometimes people are fearful of that because they feel like they're going to lose something, or that everyone else is going to be up here and they're not going to have anything. But the reality is it really is room for everyone. Okay, let me ask Princess the same question. What can our art community do to be more inclusive of all people and ethnic groups?
Do something from out of the norm. For me, I discovered ballet because I did something out of the norm. I didn't have access to ballet growing up. That's something I grew to love when I was 25. And the same can happen for a white person, to go and explore and get to know what else is out there besides the symphony, the ballet, the theater groups that you're accustomed to. Go see a random play written by a Black person showing one night only, because honestly, our things are usually just one night only. So that's all we can afford. So catch that show. Don't hesitate on it. Just, be aware of what else is happening. Get off the beaten path. Go experience something else and discover something new. I love underground arts. I love underground artists. I feel like there's just so much passion and authenticity whenever you do that. So yeah, go try something new. That's what I will say. And if you didn't like it, you supported an arts organization, or you might discover that you want to keep coming back over and over again, which is what has happened with some of my white patrons. Just kind of stumbled upon us and they continue to come back. So you just never know what you'll discover.
Thank you. Maria, I pose that same question to you. What can our art community do to be more inclusive of all people and ethnic groups?
So I think we all agree that we have to be intentional on bringing those other voices into the conversation, and not just only bringing them, but integrating them on the planning, on the execution of programming, on how, even to Ryan's point, how is that going to affect the economic development of our cities? Like we're seeing that, many cities where they involve not only art, but art and public health. And then you have the foundations and big organizations that everybody works together that is representing your community, they thrive. So, there is a lot to do. We need to look at granting. How are we distributing the grant money? Are we only going to be looking for large organizations or organizations that we know, or are we going to reach out to those small artists, those small organizations that do not have staff, or they're just trying to get off the ground? If we want to bring into our communities younger generations to continue on with art and culture, we're going to have to invest in them. So there is a lot to do, but I think, having these conversations and having actions after that, it's going to be very important. I think, like today's panel is great. We can see very different perspectives, but there is a lot more voices out there that they are not represented today. So what are we doing? Are we looking for them? They're not going to come if we don't reach out to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria. That's a good point. That's a very good point. And I pose that same question to Darlene. Darlene, what can our...
We don't have the manpower.
Let's see, Claudia, would you mind muting? Okay, thank you, Claudia. All right, we have the same question posed for Darlene. What can our art community do to be more inclusive of all people and ethnic groups?
I would say that starts with the organizations and institutions, basically making it more diverse with color, race, age, and gender. I think boards need to be more diverse, employee staff needs to be more diverse, and that way you'll bring more diverse perspectives and be able to identify the barriers. But I think really if we can all just start diversifying everything that we're doing, I definitely think that would help make things a little bit more inclusive. I mean, because you're working with inclusive people, you're working with a group of different people. So it changes the way you think and the way you act and the way you move when you're working with other like-minded people.
And a quick question for you, Darlene. I know you have become the grants manager with Arts Greensboro, and through that, you have been reaching out to a wide range of artists. Have you noticed, in terms of the artist's response to the information that you give out, have you noticed a difference between maybe a larger number of artists are now aware of things that maybe they weren't aware of before? Could you mention something about that?
I would say that basically mentioning something that Maria said. We at Arts Greensboro, especially myself, I've been putting in a due diligence as really reaching out to Native Americans. Like I've been stalking Native Americans. I've been stalking Asians. I reached out to professors at USCG. Like, can you please, any of the alumni, give them my information? With the Hispanic community, Nadie is online right now with us, and I've asked her over and over and over to reach out to the Latino community. We are really, really doing that due diligence of reaching out to all cultures. I'm texting, I'm emailing, I'm on the streets reaching out to people. I have seen a big difference. Right now, we have a pool of 400 artists that we're contacting when we send out a mass email. It is of all diverse cultures and backgrounds. We did a artist support workshop, and the North Carolina Arts Council said that that was the most engagement they've seen over the whole entire state of North Carolina. The first one we had 60 attendees, the last one we had 100 attendees, and it was a diverse group of backgrounds of every culture. So we want to continue to really do that work. It's important to Arts Greensboro, is important to the vision of our president, Laura Way, and it's also important to me as the person that she put in this position to be able to help with that access. So we are definitely doing that due diligence. So if I am stalking you, you know why.
And thank you, Darlene, for all the hard work and for including everyone and bringing everyone to the table so that we at least have the same information, so we're informed. Thank you. All right, and so our last question for the evening before we begin to take some of the comments and questions that we have in the chat room, we have about 30 minutes left. What have you learned from the discussion tonight, and what will you change moving forward? Now, this is for our panelists and for our viewers watching. We hope that you have learned something from this conversation, and from this conversation, we like to encourage and promote action. We want to promote change. So as I said before, conversations are wonderful, they're needed, and to come up with strategic plans and resolutions, but we have to start making the steps, the work to make it happen. So I'll engage each of our panelists and ask them about this. What have you learned from this discussion, and what will you change moving forward? Darlene, since we already have you in the middle of our screen, would you like to answer that question?
I guess I just know that we have a lot more work to do, but what I love about the discussion is everybody is willing to change. I think everybody has an open mind, and we're trying to do the work and figure the work out as a team. So that's what I noticed today on the panel discussion. I think that everybody that's tuned in, we're ready to do the work. And I don't think none of us feel like we have all the answers. I think we're all relying on each other to help each other throughout the process. So that's what I would say.
Very good perspective. Thank you. Ryan, can you give us your perspective of something that you learned today?
Well, maybe the first thing I'd say is I'm glad to meet Brian and Maria, who I've not had the chance to meet in person prior to, well, I guess I've still not met them in person, but I've not had the chance to speak with prior to tonight. And I think building, it's surfaced in this conversation that I think relationships are truly the key to this work, is having a network of trusted friends and colleagues who we can lean on when we don't know the answers, because none of us, as Darlene said, do, and none of us, frankly, are expected to know everything. So building a bench is important. And, I like to think that I'm a sponge every day. Impermanence is a mantra of mine. And I think we end every day a different person than we began it. And the important thing is to realize what we've learned and what we want to repeat and keep and what we want to let go of. And so I appreciate the open and candid dialogue about the real needs that my colleagues have shared. And I heard another local organizer mention on something that I was watching recently about how this really equates to violence. It may not be police brutality that we're talking about tonight, but we are talking about, in many ways, economic violence that has been rendered on communities of color in preventing the full realization of their potential and aspirations in the creative space, which is about jobs, which is about income and revenue. And so I appreciate the opportunity to hear from so candidly the folks that are here on the panel with us. And the work of the city's Office of Arts and Culture is all really brand new. We're 9 months into it, and we've got a lot of work to do. Thankfully, we're not doing it by ourselves. We're going to do it with some really great partners across the community. So thanks.
Excellent perspective. I've never thought about the violence in that, but I can totally see that restriction, where that analogy and comparison would come from. Thank you for that, Ryan. Maria, would you like to speak?
Don't ask me that question. I always want to speak. Lots, I think just being able to meet, Echo and Ryan, to connect with Darlene, to connect with Brian. I already knew Princess. We've worked together in some projects for years. So it has been wonderful to meet you, Sunny, and to connect again with Laura. It's just great, just to know that we have a very caring group of people. We're just a very small part of it, but there are so many people in our community that wants to work together, that wants our community to grow, to bring art, to expose many people to all the talent that we have, that it's going to be baby steps to it. I think there is a lot to grow to it, a lot to do, but this can be the great beginning of a great partnership and a great collaboration from many different groups, many different organizations, and many different individuals.
Thank you, Maria. Brian, would you like to share what you've learned from tonight and how you're going to move forward?
Yes, I'd once again just echo what Ryan and Maria have said. It's been a great opportunity to virtually meet you guys and have this conversation. As somebody who teaches at one of the STEM schools, one of the state STEM schools, we often don't have conversations about how important arts are. And for me, that's always a win. Anytime I can talk about art in this manner. I think that as it pertains to learning something from this panel, initially, it strengthens my resolve that it's kind of all right to be a humanist, even in the 21st century. I think that's good acknowledgement for me. And I think on the other hand, it kind of reinforced some things that I see from inside the ivory towers of academia, if that's not some latent systemic racism for you there. And this idea that we all have a similar struggle as it pertains to trying to bring art into a social space that demands equity. As much as we see art as oftentimes a passing pastime or hobby or just thing that those weird people do. Art's a very serious endeavor. And that, you know, having a conversation about how important equity is, and particularly in this day and age, with social justice being such at the forefront, and then artists being some of the main frontline soldiers in this effort. I can't think about it as a humanist. I'm kind of a halfway artist, halfway historian, and I think about, you know, how great it would have been if Dr. King and them had graffiti. I was noticing how beautiful downtown Greensboro looked in, I think it was April or early May, when the riots reached downtown Greensboro and businesses boarded up. And then almost immediately there was art. And I even took a drive downtown. This is way before the Black Lives Matter was painted in the street, when it was just an organic movement of local artists who decided that they wanted to share their artistic ability in this movement for social justice. So I've enjoyed the panel. Moving forward, I would like to see more university and institutions connect with the community a little bit more. It's something that I've always tried to do in my own work at A&T, and I hope that maybe this inspires some connectivity between members of the panel and their organizations with the university, if something that I might be able to steward and make happen. But it's been a great time just engaging in this conversation about arts and politics and equity. And you know, I appreciate the invitation.
I love that, Brian. I do believe we're really a university town, honestly. We have so many different universities and so many different colleges, and we're always talking about retaining these students when they leave, but they really need to get involved in order for us to retain them. That's difficult, and we need to be able to really have all of our kids participate. Sometimes we may just go to one university, but it really is important that we try to include everyone. Thank you for your perspective. Laura, what about you? What have you learned tonight, and what would you like to take from this conversation?
Well, I've learned that I've learned a lot of things, but first and foremost is having these conversations. Maybe I've relearned it yet again, that it's truly inspirational to know that the work you're doing, you're just one of many doing the hard work that we're doing now, making sure that arts are alive and vibrant in our community, accessible, inclusive, and built around the foundation of equity. And Arts Greensboro has work to do there. It has been not necessarily part of the solution in its past, but it is dedicated to being a catalyst for change in our community. And as Princess has said, and Maria, we have to address the systemic racism that has impeded our ability to fund organizations of color at the level they should, and to encourage and support their growth and their professional development, their audience. Everything that we had done for organizations from Green Hill to Carolina Theater to Triad Stage over the years, that same energy and emphasis must be placed on organizations of color. And then the work of getting to know our broader audience and community of artists, whether they're at A&T or Guilford College, Greensboro College, or residing up in the Northeast, down off of Florida Street. Getting out there and meeting new people who are engaged in creative practice. There's 162 neighborhoods in Greensboro, and some are a block long, and some are, 2-3 square miles large. But there's art happening in every single neighborhood, and I need to always stay cognizant. At the top of my list is get to know more artists, get to know more creative people, embrace them, bring them into the fold, and get out to meet them where they're at. And that's why I'm grateful to Darlene, because she leads by example that way. And that's why I'm grateful to people like Princess who challenge me along the way to say, be better at what you're doing. And you know, she's sitting right there on my shoulder. What would Princess say? So I appreciate that voice in my ear saying, do it better, do it more inclusively, and think about equity every single day, and think about being inspirational for a new generation of artists.
Thank you, Laura. And Princess, well, since you are our final panelist, let us know what you've learned today before we open it up for our viewers.
Yes. Well, I got to learn more about Casa Azul. Me and Claudia met just last year, and we were hoping to kind of meet up and get to know each other more, but then, you know, COVID. So it was cool to be able to hear a little bit more about the organization. And like we both guessed, we both have some of the same challenges. So I'm really excited to hear that Maria is on the board there. Y'all are about to like, that's an awesome, phenomenal woman. Y'all are so blessed to have her on your team. And I've learned, like Laura said, that my voice matters. Speaking up at first about the issues that I was seeing. At first, I was actually hesitant to do that. When I first started our organization, it wasn't a black or white thing. I wasn't here to be the first black anything. I didn't even realize there weren't a lot of black arts organizations. I just was coming with a dream. And continuously hitting that ceiling, I just had to I was so internally focused on fixing myself, fixing our organization. After a while, it's like there's nothing else to fix, so what is the problem? And realizing that systemic racism is even a thing. I grew up in Black spaces. I grew up around Black excellence. So being limited as a Black person was not something I was accustomed to. So what I'm learning is that it is important for us as Black leaders to speak up and be a voice for others who may not have found their voice yet, who don't even know what it is that they're fighting against yet, and just be vocal, because I didn't want to be that voice. I don't want to have to fight for everything that I need. It would be nice if things were just given, but unfortunately that's not where I am. But in retrospect and looking at where we are today, the changes that are taking place, the last grant application I did, kudos to Arts Greensboro. I felt a difference. I saw a difference. I saw Darlene working. I mean, it was artists who don't have their stuff together, we're just gonna be honest, but they know about Arts Greensboro and they know they gotta get their stuff together, and we're learning. And so she's just really bridging a gap. So I'm seeing the fruit of my labor and being a voice, because if I hadn't spoke up, would any of these changes have occurred? I don't know, but I know I'm just gonna always be a powerful voice. I think it's important. So I'm willing to stand in the gap until somebody else wants to take this mantle, because I'm tired.
An infectious laugh. I love it. All right, so first I just want to thank all of the panelists for being involved in this much needed dialogue and conversation. I want you to know that you are appreciated. We all know when we look at history, we know about history through the arts. So artists are record keepers of history, and people who get paid the most money are artists. We love Beyonce, we love all of these musicians and artists, and sometimes people may say, well, we love the culture, but sometimes the people for the people that the culture has. So again, I just want to tell everyone that I appreciate you and extend, just let you know how grateful I am for your participation. All right, now we will open it up for questions for our last 14 minutes. Our Zoom administrator, Tirsa Gravely, would you like to choose some questions to pose to the panelists for us, please?
Well, right now, there are no questions in the chat room. Those things that were placed in the chat room were comments as opposed to questions. But I can pose a question. So periodically, I read articles in the Greensboro News and Record about large Greensboro art projects that have been awarded to artists from other states and even other countries. What can be done to ensure that underrepresented minorities like Blacks, Latinx, Native Americans who are based in Greensboro are considered and chosen for art projects that commission or pay the artist? So I'll leave that up to who thinks you can come up with recommendations on how that can happen.
So this is Ryan. I think that I might riff on something that Princess said about like organizational funding. I understand the question is more about individual artist commission and awards, but I think that, you know, everybody's got to start somewhere, and we should be able to start at home. And so I think the way to position, I'm not sure exactly the intention behind the question, but I think what I understand is around, you know, large scale commissions for, I'm going to editorialize public art projects. I'm going to editorialize to serve sort of where I think I have something to add here. But the, you know, as I hope that the city of Greensboro is able to develop a true public art program and initiative for our community, I hope that there will be a focus on commissioning opportunities for local artists. I think that it's building the resume, it's building the credentials. And if you can't do that at home, as I think Princess said, where are you going to be able to do it? And so I hope that, I know that we have a role to play in that. I think that others do as well. But we got to create these pathways for opportunity for folks here at home as a starting point.
That's a very good point that you brought up, Ryan. That has been an issue in Greensboro because we have so many private funders as well as the city who have flown, paid artists from other states, countries to come here. They give them a stipend, a place to stay, some food, all of that. And in the meanwhile, we have all of these local artists that are craving for attention. And a lot of times they have to leave North Carolina in order to get that attention. Speaking for myself as a visual artist, I know it was very difficult for me to exhibit my work and for people to promote my work as they did other artists. But once I left North Carolina and began to start a name for myself, people started to somewhat pay attention at home. Like, well, Sonny, why aren't you doing this stuff at home? And it's like, well, no one's giving me the opportunity. So I gotta make it happen some type of way.
I just want to interject. That's what happened with Vanessa Ferguson. She was international.
Okay. Thank you, Princess. Okay, and anybody else want to address that? Okay, we do have, oh, go ahead, Darlene.
I want to say one thing though, because I do hear grumbles too, like Laura was saying, and I'm thinking of ways that I'm going to be able to communicate with the arts community. So on one end, we have Creative Greensboro, Arts Greensboro, the larger institutions doing their due diligence and their work. But then we have the individual artists and smaller art organizations where we have to kind of guide them a little bit more and mentor them. And I remember being on another Zoom meeting, and the artist didn't graduate from A&T, but was one of my students at A&T. And she was saying that she hadn't had the opportunities. And I had to correct her and let her know that you do have opportunities, but you have to put the work in. And I think that's where a lot of the local artists, they're missing that part of it. You have to have a resume already ready. You have to have a portfolio. You have to do free work. When I first moved to Greensboro, I put in 4 years of free work, putting up murals in 7 and 8 days just so people understood my work ethic. So it's just that part of it that you have to do that due diligence too. So I do think that it is an access thing that we're working on. But once you gain access, which is starting to happen, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be ready? Are you going to be prepared to walk into your artistry and become a professional artist? And that's the grumbles that I'm seeing, like around, you know, in my heads and my conversations with people. Just preparing artists to be ready for opportunities. You have to be prepared for opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree with that 100%. And I can see where young emerging artists, especially college students, should kind of do a whole lot of volunteer work and get out there so that they are getting their feet wet and kind of seeing what it's all about. But I also believe that professional artists who do this for a living should get paid for their art. So a lot of times, some organizations are asking people of color to volunteer to do things, which is fine, but those same things they're paying other people. So yes, I totally agree with you that volunteering and doing your due diligence, and you have to do a lot of work. And I definitely think that younger artists should do that. I think that if once you become seasoned and you have done your due diligence and you've shown in different places, I mean, unless it's for a fundraiser, I don't believe that we should be constantly being asked to volunteer. At some point, this, you know, it's about equity. And so we need to get paid the same as other people. But I do appreciate what you're saying, because a lot of people do want things just handed to them. And they don't understand that it does take the due diligence. It does take the hard work and building relationships with people that, you know, you may feel intimidated by, but not being afraid, as Princess said, to allow your voice to be heard and to stand up and say something if you feel a certain way. So of course, respectfully, but yes, I appreciate that. Does anyone else, as we have about 6 minutes left.
Sunny, there was one question in the chat from Ray Drayana. If you could look at that, my chat went blank, but I know it was something about college students.
Okay, I see that. She says, Radriana, hi everyone. I would like to ask, what are the opportunities that are available to college students in the area? This goes for any of the organizations here tonight. That was a good question, Radriana. Who would like to answer that? Well, what are some of the opportunities for college students?
Well, I know here at Royal Expressions, we're a teaching studio. So we actually have a training program to help college students become dance teachers. It's a certification program, and they actually get to shadow us and learn different age groups and levels of teaching dance, whatever they have interest in. And then we're always looking for administrative interns to help carry the load and learn about arts administration and dance production as well.
I know personally with Tab Art Center nonprofit, we are looking for interns to help us build our online platform. So we're always looking for young students who are talented and they just want to show their talents and their skills, and really people who are critical thinkers and can take us to the next level. So I think with a lot of students sometimes, and it is good for us to pour information into them, but it's also good for them to be proactive and research things so that when you come to an organization, you can tell them what you can bring to the table. Yes, there are things that I need to learn, but at the same time, these are some things that I'm really good at. And I research your organization and I see where I could help you do something even better. So those are things that as college students, you don't always get those gems, but when you come to organizations and you talk to people, it's always good to research people and to come there knowledgeable and able to have a conversation and let people know what you bring to the table. Yes, anybody else?
Yeah, I think I'd add to that, Sonny. Most colleges nowadays have some fashion of mandatory community service hours. And I think that for artistic students, this would be a really good way to kind of do some good in the hood and serve their soul, their artistic soul at the same time. So I think if the college student would, seek out those kind of opportunities where you can, maybe you're tutoring art, or maybe you're going to the Tab Center, or you're going to Greensboro Arts, and you're using what are your mandatory community service hours to also do some artistic. I think oftentimes college students and internships and co-ops as well, I think they get kind of pushed into a narrow way of looking at where the kind of opportunities for customer service. So, it's United Way, it's Boys and Girls Club, it's those kind of organizations, which are really great organizations. But I think that if the college student is seeking some artistic opportunities, that Tab Art Center and Greensboro Arts, Cultural Arts Center, I think that those, Azul maybe as well, Casa Azul, maybe those are the types of organizations that they could seek out as well.
And I would add to this, whatever your art form is, I would definitely be there. Wherever art is, you should be. So when I first moved to Greensboro in 2010, I came into the Cultural Arts Center at least 6 times a semester, which is 12 times a year. At every first Friday event, shaking hands with all the gallery owners, all the curators. Sometimes the opportunities are there, but you just have to show up. And like I said, I'm always going to go back to putting in that work, but building those relationships. So whatever expertise that you have, that is where you need to be hanging out, because those are where the opportunities are. Just simply being in Green Hill Gallery has gotten me plenty of opportunities. And that's just coming on First Friday saying, hey, how's everybody doing? Type thing.
Thank you for those gems, Darlene and Brian and Princess. We appreciate that. And we do want college students to know. First, I want to thank you guys for chiming in. I want to thank all of the viewers for being a part of this conversation and for listening tonight. And I want to thank the college students who tuned in and let them know that we want you guys to stay in Greensboro. We want to retain you, and we're working to keep you here. So if there are any things that you are interested in, please don't be afraid to reach out to people. But like I said, make sure you do your research and you come ready, because you never know what people are going to ask you, i.e. my business partners, Darlene Mcclinton and Watricia Schuler. You never know. So having said that, we have, it's 7 o'clock. So we did a great job staying on time with this, and I'm going to go ahead and let everyone go because I appreciate your time and I appreciate your participation. And if we don't have any other questions, have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to